Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Ivana Harinkyu if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is Tuesday, February the 1st, and today I am joined by our Education Lab reporter, Trish Crain. Now, what we're going to talk about today is something that Trish reported on yesterday and was something that was very well read and very engaging on our website that a lot of people on social media were sharing and commenting on. So we wanted to break it down today. And what that is a bill that Senator Del Marsh of Anniston is planning to file today in the Alabama legislature, giving parents a choice in the schools that they send their kids to. Now, we're going to get into more of the details of this, but kind of the overview of this bill is that it would give parents the opportunity to access the funding that the state typically uses for kids and take that funding and choose how their kid is going to be educated. There's a lot of details to work through here, Trish. I know we're going to get into some of them, but this is a bill that has been very much talked about in the last 24 hours. I know you've done a lot of reporting on it, and at the sound of it, it sounds like a great idea.
Right. And I think it sort of depends on where you land on school choice, because this is, as Senator Marsh said to me, it's the ultimate school choice bill. I mean, it's bigger than vouchers. It's bigger than, charter schools. It's the ultimate here, take the money, and parents, you go decide how you want to spend this money to educate your child.
Well, and we're going to get into kind of the opposition to that in a minute. But when you look at this, it gives parents control. We know that that is something, especially during the time of COVID, that we have heard from parents about. Parents who
Right.
have had to alter their lives completely to accommodate their children, doing virtual schooling to accommodate their kids who maybe go in person and then have to go virtual due to a rise in COVID cases. Whether the parent agrees or disagrees with masking in schools. There is just something about this pandemic that has really shifted the way a lot of parents have thought about schooling and the way a lot of parents have approached schooling. So,
Right.
before we get into some of the more kind of pros and cons of this and what people are talking about, let's get into the details of the bill. So, we know that Del Marsh called this the ultimate school choice bill, and you wrote about something that is called ESAs in this bill. So, tell us about ESAs and what exactly they are.
Okay, so ESA stands for Education Savings Account. And it's different from vouchers. People think about vouchers. A voucher really is like a ticket to a private school. Here, we're going to pay your tuition, and then you get to go to private school. This is different in that it's like a bank account. Typically, this is how this is administered. There's a bank account and with a debit card. And so parents make the expenditures, and then they have to be, allowable expenditures. You can't just spend them on anything. And then I'm not sure if it's going to be on a reimbursement basis or on an upfront basis, but I think it's going to be on an upfront basis. But so that could mean things like, private tutors. It could be private. It could be private school tuition. It could be curricular materials, books and worksheets. It can be used for testing if you want to have your child, academically tested. And also for things, parents of children in special education sometimes access occupational therapy or behavior therapy. So those kinds of things are allowable also.
Well, and this is a decent amount of money that is in this fund. That's why Del
Mhm.
Marsh said he's introducing it because this is a big fund. There has also
Mhm.
been funds allotted from other federal funding that is going to go into the education fund here. And I'm looking at your reporting in front of me. This would essentially allow several $1,000s per student for their family to make the decision about how they are educated. Now, we should also note this is not completely unique. There are other states that do similar things. So, Trish, what have we learned from the states that already have a bill, or rather a law like this in place?
Okay, so there are 8 states. There are 6 programs that are up and running, 2 that are launching next year. What we've learned, so this is not a widespread thing, right? Widespread school choice thing. What we've learned is that number one, not a lot of folks participate, right? I mean, it isn't something where everybody makes a mass exodus because really, okay, it puts the parent in charge, but they have to go find, like you agree, the parent signs an agreement to say, I'm going to have my child educated in reading and math and social studies and science. And, this being new in Alabama, I'm not sure where all those places are. A place like Florida that's had it for a longer time, businesses have popped up that can offer them these services that then parents pay for. So it's not something that typically ends up in a mass exodus. However, Alabama's bill is unique in that most of the programs, all but one of the programs that are already in existence, really restrict who can access an ESA. It's typically children with special needs. That's the most common category. And then Arizona also allows like children of military families, children of if a veteran who has died, foster care children, they can access those accounts. So West Virginia is the only one right now that has said everybody all come. And that one's not kicked off yet. That's going to kick off this year, the coming school year.
That's an important distinction you just made because I think that some of us, when we read your reporting and we first look at these ESAs in this bill, it sounds initially like every parent is going to get a check or is going to get access to money, and then they get the opportunity to decide for their kid. But it sounds like what you're saying is that the parent has to kind of do the work here, do
Mhm.
their research, decide that they want to opt into the program in order to get the money, in order to make those decisions.
Exactly. And that is where the rubber really meets the road. That's where the parent says, okay, I'm going to do this. And there is a provision in the bill as it's written right now that if you can only go back to public school at the semester break. Like if you try it out and you're like, oh, this is not working, you can re-enter public school at the semester break and not before. So, there are some restrictions. Parents have to be really serious about this. This is not, take the money and run. And there are provisions for audits. There's a governing board. Expenses have to be approved. So, I mean, there's some safeguards here. And the longest running program is Arizona, and there's some good literature out there on the internet if you want to read research studies about how parents actually used the money, and sometimes they don't even use all of the money. Another distinction I want to make too, though, glad I thought of this, in Arizona. So I said there are a lot of categories of kids that are eligible for ESAs. Kids with special needs actually get a larger amount than it's like $14,000, which is a lot of money, which is, it takes that to educate a child with special needs sometimes. And then children without special needs, they get about $6,500. So some of Florida does the same thing. They offer more money for kids with special needs. That is not a provision in Alabama's bill. And this popped up about 5 or 6 years ago, just for kids with special needs. And it really didn't get any traction at all, because, it was going to be like $6,000 at that point. And, parents of kids with special needs will tell you if they were in charge of everything, it would be a lot of out of pocket expense.
And so I think it's important to reiterate what you said. This is not take the money and run, as you said.
Mhm.
This is not something where you're going to get a check in the mail and you do with it what you please. You have to really do the work, do the research, and like you said, go and find what category your child best fits into.
Mhm.
If you believe your child should go to a charter school or to go to a school that is out of your district, to homeschool, etc. So question that I have for you is those school choices. Can you kind of go over what the choices are? And if, say, I live in a certain district and I want my child to go to a school that's out of district that maybe isn't a magnet or a charter school, that is just a typical school,
Mhm.
maybe across the town line, can I
Mhm.
do that?
Okay, so first, let me just clear one thing up. So charter schools are free. So this would not be you would not take your money to a charter school. The charter school would get the money directly from the state for your child to attend there. So you would not be accessing an ESA if you were enrolled in a charter school. But yeah, so let me answer that last question first because that's big on people's minds. If I am a student in Hoover, which is where I live, and I want to access Mountain Brook, the wealthiest system in the state. And I mean, they have a lot of really cool things to offer in Mountain Brook. Um, I don't get to just go. I have to ask Mountain Brook if they will accept my child. And if they say yes, I mean, technically, if you become a student in Mountain Brook, they're gonna get the money from the state. So I'm not really sure the mechanism. I'm not sure you would get an ESA and take it to Mountain Brook if you were going to enroll as a full-time student. Now, if they had a specialized program and you wanted to enroll your child in that, it's kind of like an a la carte thing, where, oh, maybe I'll pay you $4,000 to go to your engineering academy or something like that. But the public school districts, I don't know a lot of them that have a lot of space. Some of them do. Some of them have a lot of space and room for kids, but a lot of them don't. And so they're going to be in complete control of whether or not they let you in, like they are now. I mean, some districts already have open enrollment. Some districts you can freely move, between districts and they don't charge you anything. That's not the norm, but it does happen in some Alabama school districts.
I'm glad you mentioned the kind of a la carte program that the way you described it, because I was considering if I was a parent and I had a child maybe in a school system, I'm just going to take one just as a guess, say that to my kid, we'll use Hoover as the example. And I wanted my child to maybe go to either maybe Spain Park for their law academy. Maybe I wanted my child to go to Jefferson County for their career tech programs. They have a masonry career tech
Mhm.
program. They have a nursing program. If I wanted my kid to go to one of those types of systems, they are public. They are,
Mhm.
though, not exactly where I live. I think that is going to be interesting. And I think that that's going to be something that seems like might not be totally spelled out yet in this bill.
Right. I mean, I expect pushback from superintendents and, from school board members because part of me thinks about like tracking the data on this. Like, how are you going to know? I mean, we already in Alabama allow homeschool students to access a few courses within a public school district if the public school district will take you, right? So that's already happening. And then those kids, they can do extracurriculars. They can play on your sports teams. They can play in the band, sort of thing. So that's already happening. And I don't know where those numbers are, to be honest with you. I've asked, and they're just not, there's not great reporting to know how many kids are actually taking advantage of that. But I know I've talked with a couple of moms who are happy with that because maybe their daughter wants to play volleyball for Hoover, and yet the family travels a lot, so it's like she can't be in public school all the time. And there's also this thing, online school, right? I mean, we saw this whole big shift. Everybody was doing remote school for a while, but there are three statewide. They allow enrollment from the entire state, and they're public virtual schools. So there's one in Limestone County, there's one in Eufaula, and there's one in Chickasaw City. And they have, I wrote the numbers down, they have like 13,000 students between the three of them. Yeah, and that's a lot of kids. That enrollment has grown tremendously over the last couple of years. But these are online school providers that have experience in online school. They were already doing online school before online school became a thing, right? That you had to do. So let's see, school choice. You asked me what other school choice. We do have public charter schools. They cannot have. We have 8 of them, so it's not like we have a lot of charter schools. And typically they will take first from the surrounding area. Like they have to have open enrollment. They can't, they can't ask you to take a test, and they can't turn you down because your kid is, you know, uh, got in trouble, but it has some discipline problems. Like they can't say no unless they have more kids in the grade than they have capacity for. And then they have to do a lottery. Okay. But once you're in, you're in. So if you start a public charter school at first grade, you're going to get into the second grade. And then let's see, we have a lot of magnet schools. And, there's you and I were chatting a little bit. There's some misconceptions about magnet schools. Most all of the magnet schools in Alabama have some sort of entrance requirement. And there are not a lot of them, maybe 30. Montgomery's got a lot. Birmingham has a few. Mobile has a bunch. Huntsville has a bunch. Decatur even has a couple. But those are schools where they typically, not all of them, but you have to meet some base requirement. Like either your GPA is this, you got a 2.5 or a 3.0. And if you have a history of discipline problems, you're probably not going to get into a magnet school. That's unusual. For Alabama to have most all of its schools like that, magnet schools, that's unusual. In other states, they're not, selective admission magnet
Hmm.
schools. So, magnet schools really sort of, they're like charter schools, but magnet schools are under the purview of the local board of education. And so I've always wondered why we don't do more magnet schools. But, you know, I don't make the decisions. Nobody
Well,
else.
you mentioned the discipline aspect of this, and I know that I saw probably the dean more times in high school than I would have been allowed in maybe some of these places.
Oh my
So
God.
I think Dean Logan remembers me well, excuse me. So going through several of these comments here, I have some really great questions. I have one question from Christopher, and I think this is important, and I'm not sure that we've touched on this yet, Trish.
Okay.
Christopher says, "Will the money be given to parents be taken away from the local public school for which they are zoned?" So if I have a parent in the Birmingham City Schools who says,
Mhm.
I'm going to go into one of these virtual schools, maybe the Limestone virtual school option. Is that
Mhm.
money going to come from the Birmingham City Schools district?
It already does. Okay, so let's leave education savings accounts out for just a minute. Let me explain how funding works in Alabama. So, enrollment in any given year determines your funding for the following year. So if kids move out for whatever reason, you're not going to get the money for them down the road. It's not an immediate thing, but it's like a 1 year delay. But so money follows the kids now, right? So like when kids graduate in 12th grade, they're gone and you don't get money for them anymore. But typically, you're backfilling with kindergartners or ninth graders or something. So that's how it goes now. And education savings accounts would not probably be used for like an online virtual school, like the public ones. But if you're going into a private situation or you're homeschooling and you take your ESA money, yeah, down the line, that district is going to have one less kid. And so they're going to get funding for one less kid. So, I mean, that's how it is now. But yes, this is one more mechanism for kids to leave, and then funding would go down the following year.
That's a good point. I'm glad you make that kind of delay in funding point, because this is not necessarily that $3,200 comes directly out of the bank account of that district today, but it would be something that kind of trickled down in the line. Now,
Right.
another question here, we've got several questions, one from Ed and also one from Kevin about sports. So one from Ed is they're similar questions, so I'll give them to you at the same time. Ed says, what if a kid wants to transfer district for sports reasons? I'm assuming, kind of envisioning rather, a kid in a district, let's just pick Trussville, for example, who
Mhm,
wants to go to Hoover to play football.
mhm.
How does that work? And Kevin says, how will this affect the AHSAA rules for athletes that must live in the district? We know AHSAA is very strict about that.
Right. So AHSAA, it's in the bill that their rules still apply. So whatever rules they have in place at the time, their rules will apply. So, and I'll be honest, I'm not well versed on AHSAA, but I think if you transfer, you have to sit out for a year, right? And I know the whole, they called it the Tim Tebow bill, to allow homeschool kids to play on sports teams. I know the AHSAA wrote some rules around that. But I think, whatever rules are currently in place will be the rules that follow the kids. So it won't be a way, I mean, yeah, recruiting could happen. It happens now. But the kid has to come in and sit out for a year. So I don't know. Does that answer that question?
I
Maybe.
think it does. This is
Okay.
essentially, I think what you're saying is AHS rules stand. If
Correct.
this bill goes further, and if this bill does make it into law, which it is not at the moment, it's just a bill that is set to
Mhm.
be filed today. I actually didn't check, Allison, before I jumped on here to see if it even had been filed, but it was set to be filed
I
today.
did.
That's what
Not
Del
there.
Marsh had told us.
Yeah.
So we're a long way from that, but it sounds like whatever the AHSA rules are today would still be the rules if this was in place.
Correct.
Another question here, or not even as much a question, is several comments saying, look, this is a bad idea. And I think it's important to kind of backtrack to what we said earlier, Trish, that I think a person reading your story initially has a knee-jerk reaction of saying,
Mhm.
this seems great. Parents can have their choice.
Mhm.
Parents want to have a more of a say, especially since the
Mhm.
pandemic and the way their child is educated. And Del
Right.
Marsh actually makes a comment. I'm going to read the quote out. You quoted him in this article. He says that he expects the Senate Education Policy Committee to approve this bill tomorrow. And he
Mhm.
says, quote, I would ask the question to any lawmaker. Do
Yes.
you think a parent should have a choice in their child's education? I would be very hesitant as to a lawmaker who would say no. So, and
Right.
that's an end quote there. So we look at, again, this article, we look at the choice you're offered to parents. We look at Del
Mhm.
Marsh saying, look, lawmakers are going to go for this because it gives more choice in a state that people value their choices probably more than anything else, right? So
Right.
tell us a little bit about maybe why some people, like several of our commenters, say this is not a good idea. Tell us what some of the opposition says, and maybe we will see if Del Marsh is right, but maybe why he wouldn't be right in that comment.
Right. So, yeah, so opposition is pretty fierce. I mean, knee-jerk reactions can go both ways. I mean, I saw in our comments yesterday under the article, a lot of people were saying this is a terrible idea. Like we will defund the public schools. Somebody said this will be the death of public schools. And my reaction, I think about that and I think, why? Like, is it that bad that everybody's going to immediately leave? And if it is, what does that say? Like, I mean, so I don't know. It's hard to sort of parse that out in my head. But critics say, this is just a way, they call it, privatizing education. Typically, and there's an argument there that says public schools have a lot of accountability. I mean, they have to test kids. We have, the failing schools list that, is a shame. It's a way to shame the schools into sort of getting better. Um, I have a lot of thoughts on that. Anyway, but so they say, this is just not good for public schools because private schools, there's no accountability. They don't have to test kids. We don't know what they're doing. In Alabama, particularly, we have no regulatory authority over private schools, none. So, private schools have to do background checks for kids, but that regulatory authority, there was some there, but it got removed in 2013. There was a kerfuffle. And so, it was like, no, private schools don't want any regulatory authority over them. So they're sort of sovereign. And, people say, well, they're getting public money. Shouldn't there be some public accountability? And in other states, not all of them, but in other states, there are accountability regulations that say you do have to test the kids. So, Alabama's sort of leaving it wide open right now, the way it's written right now. And so it's like, well, we're spending public dollars, but we don't know how well they're doing. And didn't that start with No Child Left Behind, where we started saying, what's our return on investment? If we're investing $6,000 in a kid who is, not learning well, is that a good investment? And educators will say, it's not that simple, right? You can't just look at a grade and say we paid 6,000 for the kid and the kid got an F and therefore it's a bad investment, because it's an overtime thing. So, there are arguments on both sides. I mean, I saw a lot, in schools. The first year, 2019-20, everybody loved teachers, the spring of 2020, 1920. It was like, oh, teachers are great. How are y'all doing this? And then by the time school started in 2020, in the fall, it was like, we don't want to wear masks, or we do want to wear masks and y'all aren't asking us to, or we want to go remote, or we don't want to go remote. So people were of differing opinions. And I saw a lot of talk at that point. Why don't they just give us our money back and let us go pick an education for our kids? And I mean, that is the way the parents feel, and they're really looking out for their kid. But supporters of public education will tell you, and the numbers bear it out, that most of the kids will stay in public school. So public schools do need to be well funded.
Well, and I think you just answered one question, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to, if you want to clarify here. Joanna says, so what's the real point of this bill? Is it going to improve
Mhm.
educational opportunities for students in the state?
That is, I think the real point is to give parents the choice. I mean, I think that parents, Senator Marsh and Representative Meadows believe that, parents will make good decisions, and that they have both sort of railed against this idea that I'm stuck in the school that I'm zoned to. You know, I've often said that while schools do need time to improve, it takes 3 to 5 years for school to meaningfully improve. But as a parent, you're like, well, I don't get to pull my kid out of your school while you improve it. Like my child still has to go to school. That's the law. So parents really feel a different kind of urgency perhaps than school people who work in schools because they know that this stuff takes time. So I think it is about giving parents the choice. And right on the heels of that is both believe that this will make public schools better. And there is some research out there. There's a lot of research on both sides of the charter school debate, but there's some research to show that the public schools, where the charter schools start, that they actually do improve. That competition does have some kind of effect on the public schools that are non-charter, because they want to keep their kids there. They don't want to lock them down, but they want kids to be able to choose to be there. So I think that's it.
Also, a question here from Joy. How is this different from the Accountability Act?
It's different. So thanks for that question, because some of these things, even I got confused when I was writing the article. But so the Accountability Act allows for what are called tax credit scholarships. Okay, so that means that it's not, the money doesn't go to the child. So private donors give donations to scholarship granting organizations that are nonprofits. They kind of gather up the money and then they dole it out to kids who go to school. It's like a voucher, but it's not directly from the state to the kids, so it's not a voucher. Some people call them neo vouchers because the money goes through a nonprofit and then pays for the child's private school. So we have and in Alabama, the tax credit scholarships are restricted to kids who are considered low income. So that is not a free for all either. You've got to show a need, and about 3,000 kids use those scholarships. Most of those kids are kids of color, based on some research I did a couple of years ago. And most of those kids are coming out of urban systems like Birmingham and Montgomery, and even Huntsville. So, but it's a very different mechanism. And so what happens, so the impetus, the reason, the motivation for people to donate to those scholarship granting organizations is they get a dollar for dollar tax credit, right? So on their income tax up to a certain limit. But to make it easy, if I donate $100 to an SGO, when my income tax comes due, I get to deduct $100. That's the reasoning. Again, there are income limits, and corporate donations can work the same way. But it does rely on people to actually donate the money. So it doesn't come directly from the Education Trust Fund, but it does in a way, because income tax is what feeds the Education Trust Fund. So if you're not paying into income tax, then that money never gets into the Education Trust Fund and never makes its way to schools. How's that for confusing?
Extremely. A couple of other just quick rapid fire questions for you. One from Holly. Can the money be used to put your child in a private religious school?
Yes, if the school agrees to participate.
Also, a question here, I think this is an important one from Christopher. What safeguards will be in place to prevent school districts from discriminating as it pertains to acceptance?
There is a provision that says that whoever's participating has to acknowledge, like in written form, and describe their non-discriminatory policy. So, it sounds good on paper. We all can name instances of kids who have been denied admission to a private school because they have special needs that the school can't serve or something like that. So that is somewhere, if this passes, we'll be on the lookout for that to see if they actually are discriminating.
Trish, this is a loaded bill. There's a lot I know that'll come here. I know that, again, this bill is set to be filed today. And if it is filed today, it's set to go to the Senate Education Policy Committee tomorrow. So there will be a lot more reporting to be done on this. So I know we can expect that from you and from our education lab at AL.com. So just, tell us quickly what kind of the lifespan here is expected for this bill. We know that, again, it could, if it's filed today, it could go to that committee tomorrow. And then would be hopefully up for a vote sometime this session. So tell us a little bit about when we can expect a little bit more news here.
Okay, so if it hits the Senate Education Policy Committee tomorrow and it gets a favorable report, which means the majority of the committee members say, okay, yep, we'll let it pass on through to the full Senate, then the Senate, 35 senators, they will vote. Well, not necessarily, like it has to get to the floor. There's a gateway. And sometimes bills don't make it to the floor because whoever's guarding the gate doesn't ever let it get to the floor. But then suppose that it goes to the Senate, full Senate, the Senate approves it, then it flips over to the House and it would go into a House policy committee, probably the Education Policy Committee. They would have to do the same things. They would approve it, send it to the full House, and then the full House would have to approve it in order for it to pass. And, the take effect date is this year, July 1. So it's set to go immediately into effect if it does pass.
It is going to be an interesting session for several reasons, but this is one I know that a lot of people will be interested in the outcome. So, Trish, thank you so much for kind of giving us the 411 on this, really breaking it down. And again, kind of reading between the lines a little bit on some of these more intricate policy lines. So thank you, Trish. Again, you can follow Trish and all of our Education Lab reporters on AL.com. We'll leave a link here where you can check out their work. Everybody watching, thank you so much, and we'll see you tomorrow.